and the land is dark.
And welcome back to Talk of the Town. I'm your host, Steve Noxon, and right now I'm joined by Alexandra Smith. She's the executive director of the America Rising PAC. She's also a former chairwoman of the College Republican National Committee. How are you, Ms. Smith?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
I appreciate you coming on today. In the last half hour, I was talking about the media reaction to the latest outrage, the outrage du jour, it seems, that we go through. But this was something that we dealt with last week. Last week's outrage was the nomination of Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court.
And, you know, the Democrats just absolutely fell apart over this. You know, I think that you could look no further than on Monday night when the president nominated Judge Kavanaugh in this great primetime event. You know, we heard all about Judge Kavanaugh's sterling credentials, his community service. It was a great event. And meanwhile, outside the Supreme Court, you had the professional protesters from Planned Parenthood and NARAL, you know, kind of ready with their signs. They didn't even know who it was going to be, but they had pre-printed signs with the names. And some of the protesters didn't even get the memo after it was announced, so they kept holding up signs for the other judges who didn't get chosen.
Well, you have to give them credit though, because this is better than what they did the last time, which was where they printed up the signs that just said oppose and then a blank space underneath. And then
for them to write in.
For them to write in the name of who the nominee was, and then immediately, it's Gorsuch, oppose Gorsuch. Ah!
Well, my favorite was the women's march, who sent out a press release saying that we oppose XX.
And then a little later spelled his name wrong. That's like,
and the DNC used the wrong image. They used the image of Judge Hardiman, not of Judge Kavanaugh, in a graphic that they had made opposing him. So everyone is, you know, absolutely apoplectic in D.C. right now over this nomination, and it's truly ridiculous. You know, I mean, this is someone who is just superbly qualified. This is someone who's demonstrated fidelity to the Constitution. He's going to interpret the laws as written and not read in policy. And I think that's where Democrats really fall apart over this, because they expect judges and the judiciary to act as like a third legislator for them. So, you know, someone who can help them affect policy goals that they couldn't do at the ballot box.
Well, and we've seen this over the last few years. I mean, look, I have nothing against gay marriage, but there's, you know, states' rights and states' laws, and this is something that over the last couple of decades has seems to been put aside for these particular cases and these particular positions where they want to leave it in the hands of the court to make the final decision on everything, as you know, and the Congress itself, I think, has actually dropped the ball and is almost just not doing their jobs in actually proposing legislation to do the things that they want to do. They're all leaving it up into the hands of these 9 people.
Well, and that's why I think that you're seeing such opposition, because they don't, you know, they haven't figured out how to quite organize on the ground from the state legislators on up to affect policy outcomes. And so the courts sort of become a place of last resort for them. And I also think it stems from the fact that they have no guiding judicial philosophy. You know, we as conservatives look for, you know, we look for originalism and we look for textualism. So we're looking for people who are going to interpret the Constitution according to its original public meaning. And we're looking for textualists who will look at the letter of the law and not sort of other policy considerations. And, you know, liberals don't have they don't have a corollary to that. They don't have, you know, an opposing judicial philosophy to that of conservatives. And so, you know, that's why all of their arguments are sort of incoherent, because, you know, as conservatives, we can articulate what we want in a judge. For liberals, all they can do is talk about doomsday scenarios of what happens when a judge is nominated. By the way, these are the same doomsday scenarios that they predicted when Justice Kennedy, when Justice Kennedy was nominated to the Supreme Court. And you know, he ended up ruling in several cases that they found very favorable. So I think that a lot of this is just completely overstated and truly ridiculous on their part.
Well, and it's interesting with Judge Kennedy is they loved him when he was on the bench because he was a pretty reliable swing vote. They knew that on things like gay marriage and other liberal agenda items, he was very open to them. He was very amenable to them. Yet when he went to retire, he became the worst person that's ever walked the face of the earth. It was really fascinating to watch all these people turn on him.
Well, and again, I think that you can just see the lack of consistency in their beliefs. You know, it's not that they were supportive of Justice Kennedy for a particular judicial philosophy. They were supportive of him insofar as he supported things that they liked, and they were not supportive of him insofar as, you know, things that they didn't like the Janus decision, for example. You know, whereas, like, you know, as conservatives, we can look at someone like Justice Gorsuch. This is another great justice that the president nominated and we confirmed to the Supreme Court during his first term in office. Justice Gorsuch applies the principles of originalism and textualism, and at times in the last term, that's led to policy outcomes that the liberals actually favor. A couple cases involving immigration, for example. But as conservatives, we can look at Justice Gorsuch and say he was coming from a particular judicial philosophy. His reasoning was grounded in that philosophy, and that's something we believe in as conservatives, even if it runs counter to certain policy outcomes that might be out there. Liberals, on the other hand, they're at the whims of sort of their emotions because they don't have a philosophy that guides their thinking in this way.
Another interesting thing about Brett Kavanaugh is that there are a number of people on the right who are not happy with this pick. They think that he had an opportunity to undermine the Affordable Care Act, yet he had this argument with one of the attorneys about what is a fee versus a tax, and that some people look at that and say, well, now that's pretty telling about how he's going to rule on the Supreme Court.
Well, I think it's important to note, first of all, you know, really we, you know, in any kind of appellate division or any, you know, when cases reach the Supreme Court, we're talking about a very narrow issue, a very, you know, sort of a narrowing of the issues, a narrowing of the facts, and we're deciding things on, you know, a lot of times on procedure, and not so much on, you know, sort of the merits of the case, because of course that is the job of the trial courts. And so, you know, I think that some of the nitpicking is a little bit overblown in this case because, you know, by the time that the case reaches the Supreme Court or even the D.C. Circuit, you know, we're talking about a very particular set of facts or set of legal circumstances. And so I don't think it has, you know, the wider ranging policy implications that some people are reading into it. But I also think, too, it kind of speaks to an embarrassment of riches that we have on the conservative side, that we have so many incredible qualified jurists. The president gave us a list of these people, you know, before he was even elected. It was a risk to put that out there, quite frankly, given the tenor of the 2016 elections and the way things were going. And, you know, he put out judges that on the one hand were incredibly qualified, but also people that, you know, liberals would go crazy over. And, you know, we sort of had our pick from among the top, you know, the top jurists in the country. And so, you know, I think that not only is some of the nitpicking just sort of us as conservatives being particular, and we can afford to be persnickety because we have so many people, but also, you know, it really just speaks to the depth and to the talent that we have, and kind of exposes the left for what they lack.
So, speaking with Alexandra Smith, she's the executive director of the America Rising PAC. So what's next in this process? Judge Kavanaugh has been nominated. People have run to the microphones and made their comments. I mean, we certainly have. It sounds to me like Chuck Schumer has given up the ghost here. He doesn't really think he can hold the Democrats in unity against Judge Kavanaugh. When you hear comments like, was it Joe Manchin saying that Chuck Schumer can kiss his whatever? I heard that, and all I could think to myself was, wow, what brave election year courage.
Exactly. Well, so what happens next is like a sort of speed dating. And former Senator John Kyle from Arizona, he's going to be what they call Judge Kavanaugh's Sherpa. So, the Senate is all about collegiality and long-standing relationships, and Senator Kyle certainly has that in spades with his Senate colleagues, as did Senator Ayotte when she led Justice Gorsuch through this process last time around. Senator Kyle is going to take Judge Kavanaugh around to meet with the key senators. And look, if the senators are interested in actually doing their jobs rather than kowtowing to the most extremes of their base and of sort of Hollywood leftist fundraising money, they will sit down with Judge Kavanaugh and really kick in the tires. I mean, this is what this process is about. Go ask him the questions. Go ask him his philosophy and about his past rulings. He has 12 years of experience and 12 years of writing that they can ask about. So for someone like Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, who is up for re-election in the state that the president won, for her to say that she's not even going to meet with this guy, it's just like, it's absurd to me. I mean, these people have a job to do, and I'd have more respect for them if they met with him and then opposed him, as opposed to just not even meeting with him.
Yeah, at least go through the motions, pretend you're not just automatically going to vote against the guy, and maybe you could have a little bit more credibility in this. We have a senator here from Connecticut, Senator Richard Blumenthal, who sits on the Judicial Committee. And without even meeting with the guy, he said within like an hour of this guy getting nominated, he's going to vote no on him. And he would have voted no on any nominee from this president. So it's like, okay, well, then you've lost all credibility with me when you do something like that.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think that Senator Blumenthal actually, when Justice Kennedy said he was retiring and it was apparent that we had a Supreme Court vacancy, he had made some generic statement about, he had kind of stuck a toe in the water and said, oh, well, I'll meet with whoever it is and we'll go through the process. And even that was not extreme enough for the left in this country. So he had to backtrack and then come out and say, I'm going to oppose whoever it is. So, I think that it just shows how utterly extreme these people have gotten. And I think that that's just not going to be appealing to a majority of Americans. We were able to pull over 3 Democrats last time. Most Americans want this process wrapped up before the midterm elections. So the more that Democrats carry on into the fall with these extreme tactics and, these ridiculous displays, I think the worse it fares for them at the ballot box this November.
It's interesting you kind of went there because that was going to be my next line of questioning, I guess. It sounds like I'm accusing you of a crime. My next line of questioning.
Yes.
The idea that this is a political year, this is an election year, not a presidential election year, which is a significant difference, by the way. Do you see this really having a major impact at the ballot box?
I do. To put this into perspective, in 2016, about a fifth of the electorate cited the Supreme Court as their top issue in the exit polls. And of that 20% for whom this was the most important issue, they supported President Trump by a wide margin. So, I think that this is a motivator for the conservative base because, of course, in an off year, because the pendulum always swings back and forth. And, when we have one party in power in the White House, in the midterm elections, history sort of dictates that the other party is going to have an advantage. And I think some of that comes from, the party that's in power sort of resting on their laurels a little bit. They had a big victory in just 2 short years ago, and so they're happy with the way things are going, and people tend to sort of get complacent. And I think that the fact that, this is such a motivating issue for conservatives, the fact that it really energizes them, this could be sort of the kick in the pants that they need to get their supporters out in a lot of these very close midterm contests. So I think that, and other than just inspiring enthusiasm among conservatives, I think that it also puts acute pressure on the 10 Senate Democrats who are up for re-election in states the president won. 5 of those states he won by 15 points or more. And so, we had 3 senators from the Democratic side break for Justice Gorsuch. I would expect that we'll see even more this time around, because someone like Claire McCaskill or Bill Nelson in Florida, these are people who have voted against Justice Gorsuch, then they voted against repealing Obamacare, then they voted against the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So if they vote against confirming Judge Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, Missouri and Florida voters are going to look at them and say, what have you done for us lately? We sent you to Washington and you're not doing anything that we wanted you to do.
Well, that's why Senator Manchin, to me, is so fascinating, because West Virginia is a very red state, yet he's a Democrat, but he's a very conservative Democrat. And so while the Senate already has a Republican, while the Republicans already have a majority in the Senate, they have to be very careful about keeping all of their people in line. People like Senator Manchin, and conversely, people like Senator Collins and Murkowski, seem to have a lot of power in this particular situation.
Well, they do, because, of course, there are a few voices in the Senate that they can sort of go either way. And look, I hope Joe Manchin, votes for Judge Kavanaugh, even though I think not voting for him would definitely be the nail in the coffin come November for him with West Virginia voters. I do think, that there are certain things that are above partisan politics, and I think, confirming a qualified person to the Supreme Court and someone who's going to interpret the Constitution the way that we as conservatives believe it ought to be interpreted, it rises above, sort of these petty squabbles. And I think that, when looking at his record, I think for these senators, Senator Murkowski and Senator Collins have already signaled their comfort with him. So liberals' attempt to sort of scare them into submission didn't really work. I think Chuck Schumer's, attempt to keep everybody in line has drawn rebuke from someone like Senator Manchin. And, like I said, there are a few more senators out there who don't have anything to show to their constituents that they worked with the president on in the last 2 years. To me, this is a slam dunk. This is a great way to say to your constituents, you know what, I reached across the aisle and I worked with the president to confirm a great jurist to the Supreme Court. This guy is qualified. He's incredibly bright. And, I just can't see why, other than, worries about fundraising from far left activists drying up, I can't see why this is such a dilemma for some of these characters here.
Well, I think it goes back to our original point in the conversation, is that they've depended on the court system to get so much of their agenda through, because they know it's not going to go through if you leave it up to Congress or to the American people. And they've had a good run on that, even to the point now where we have district and circuit court judges that are overruling the president's decisions on border security, where it's like, you don't have any right to do that. But they seem to want to claim it. Alexandra Wright, she's the executive director of America Rising PAC. Where can people learn more about your organization, or maybe follow you on Twitter?
Yep, they can go to AmericaRisingPAC.org, or they can follow us on Twitter at America Rising. I'm at Alexandra C. Smith on Twitter.
Pleasure speaking with you, Alexandra, and thanks for your time. We'll get you back again.
Yes, thank you so much.